welcome to the ICT Pulse podcast. I'm Michele Marius, your host and the editor and publisher of ICT Pulse, the online platform where we discuss ICT issues from a Caribbean perspective. Welcome to our community chat. Joining me today are Nerissa Golden, the CEO of Golden Media, managing editor of Discover Montserrat and the founder of Maverick Endeavors, who is based in Montserrat, and Alvin Augustin, an engineer and the spectrum officer at the Eastern Caribbean Telecommunications Authority, ECTEL, which is headquartered in St. Lucia. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Michele.
Thank you, Michele, for having us.
Okay, in this community chat, we'll be discussing two topics. First, why content creation is key to unlocking the Caribbean's digital economy, which Nerissa submitted for discussion, and second, regulatory challenges that the Internet of Things poses, which Alvin tabled. All right, so we're going to start with why content creation is key to unlocking the Caribbean digital economy. And I guess just to start, I'll just say across the Caribbean region, we occasionally hear policymakers advocating for more local content. But truth be told, it does not appear to be a priority in the region. So Nerissa, you selected this topic, so please go ahead and share your initial thoughts and concerns.
All right. Thank you so much for having me again, Michele. I was just thinking about, on a daily basis, I consume hours and hours of content. So even if I'm on my laptop, I've got YouTube open in one window and something else going on in my ear on another side. This is a podcast that we're on. This is a regular part of my day. I'm going to be reading or listening to somebody's latest think piece about their area of interest. And this is the same for just about everyone around the region. But we, as we've always said, is that we are consuming it, but we're not creating enough of it. As I was just checking up to see where we were in the region, in preparation for this discussion, I came across an article that you actually wrote back in 2013. And a colleague of mine, Ria Yao Ching, she was talking about the fact that local digital content remains one of the most effective means of increasing internet penetration, for the region. And how have we done since then? We're better at it, but we're still a far way off. And just to begin the discussion, I want to say that the area I think we actually need to be focused on more than anything else. I think we're getting there as it relates to there's more music. We see a lot more film happening, still not on the level that would compete with, say, a Nollywood or a Hollywood or anything. But we are progressing in those areas. But I think in terms of the knowledge space around our teaching, what's in our head, this is an area I think that we have great potential to develop an economy around, and we're not seeing enough of that. And I think this is one of the key areas that we should focus on, and I would love to see more Caribbean people being in the digital space, sharing their knowledge. Estimates are that by 2022, the e-learning market worldwide is going to be $243 billion US. That is a lot of money. And Caribbean people have decades and centuries of knowledge in their heads, and we're not using it. And I would love to see that this is something that we begin to see more of, because it literally will change our economies if we can do this.
Absolutely, Nerissa. So, Alvin, you have any thoughts before I jump in?
It's something that has been close to my heart, where we're coming from a point of building the infrastructure in the region. As we know, we're looking at local IXPs, which are internet exchange points, so that we could have local content staying local. But part of the challenge that there is for the operators and persons who develop infrastructure is the amount of local content that is actually being generated. So from my standpoint, I would like to see more local content being developed for not just only our consumption, but for those out of the region as well. I think it has its benefit to all of us, both the local economy and externally as well.
Okay. So actually, one of the questions that came to mind when I was preparing, we want local content, and it means, does it need to be hosted in country, which probably points to, is more in line with your sort of thoughts, Alvin, because you're talking about internet exchange points? Or is it okay that the content is generated, but it may not be hosted in a particular country in the region or in the region at all?
I don't think it needs to start that way. I think we need to make use of what's already available to us. While we're talking about creating local content, it should not be just for local consumption. It really is to make sure that it's available to as wide an audience as possible. And you will find that it's actually your Caribbean people abroad who will consume the most of it, whether it's out of nostalgia, whether it is a desire to stay connected to home. You will find that they will be the biggest champions for the content that you're creating in your local space. So it needs to be available to them. And I think as it continues to grow and that we see the market for it, then you can have, whether it's St. Lucia or Montserrat, decide, okay, we think we have the numbers to be able to create a resource that we can start to house Caribbean content in the Caribbean. But it really should not be something that needs to be in place first for us to get anywhere. We need to just make use of what's there.
I agree fully. And just to add that, as you would know, Michelle and Nerissa, there have been recent moves to improve the infrastructure. By that, I mean the telecoms infrastructure. Most countries have moved to 4G mobile systems, and you have fiber being rolled out to the homes. So therefore, we have the pipes available, but there's a dearth of local content that's being fed through those pipes. And I would encourage all content developers, both locally, regionally, and even in those based outside of the region, to look at taking advantage of those systems and infrastructure.
But Alvin, and I wonder with the extent to which our people recognize that they have the power to create content. Sometimes when one hears the term, content creator and so on, you think about somebody who might already be in the arts, or whether or not producing a lot of writing, or being within some sort of performing arts or graphic artist or so on. And as you were talking, Alvin, one of the things that I recalled is that I read in the regional papers about this major fire at the Folk Research Center in St. Lucia.
That's correct.
And, it kind of broke my heart, because clearly it has been a repository for a lot of the heritage, the cultural heritage of St. Lucia. And you wonder how much of it was, digitized and publicly available, or at least in some form stored digitally, such that with the fire consuming, I guess what might have been documents and so on, that at least all was not lost.
Yes, well, that has been a very tragic event, because there were lots of, as you said, recordings, you name it, lots of documents being stored there. As to whether they were digitalized, I cannot speak to that. But a part of the issue we have with local content development is to move it onto the digital platform that are currently available to us. I mean, there are lots of recordings. You go back to whether it's calypso or reggae, going way back, that are on audio tapes. But as to bringing it onto the digital platforms, for whatever reason, they have been slow, like a lot of documents, so forth. So there is content in the region to be placed on these IT platforms. Whether we need some incentives, whether it's through government or non-governmental agencies to assist in that, that's something we could look at. But in terms of content, there's a lot of content out there. I even go back to my children following, there's these YouTube bloggers. They follow them and they would tell you that these guys are in the Caribbean if they're in St. Lucia and so on. So, I mean, the Caribbean itself is a place where content can be generated. And we have to look at avenues to encourage content developers, whether it's through tax breaks or the other forms available, but we need to encourage the development of our own local content as well as the marketing of that content.
I totally agree. One of the things that I think has to happen, first of all, is that we really need to understand that our work is valuable. I think because we've spent so many decades telling our people to become like somebody else, that we've actually destroyed that fundamental root desire to appreciate what we have. So Alvin is right in terms of when you look at historic documents, there's a big push towards finding out our ancestry. And I mean, people will connect with me on Facebook and ask me, are you related to so-and-so? Because we have a similar last name, is that your married name or your maiden name? Because they're looking for connection. So if all of our digital documents across the region were online and were made searchable, we could then be able to collect a payment for somebody to go through our documents to be able to find their roots. So that's something that can generate money for countries. But we are not seeing the absolute value in the things that are authentically ourselves. And until we do that, we are going to keep having these limitations. It is very expensive to digitize things. Montserrat has been making an effort to do that, applying for funding to different organizations to be able to do that bit by bit. And the more of it that becomes available is the more that you now have people who can access it more efficiently and be able to monetize it in different ways. I also think that we also have a very perfectionist mentality. So we want to produce something that looks like NBC or Hollywood. When if you look at how a lot of the bloggers started, they're starting with small cameras and a shaky video and things like that. We're not willing to go through the steps to be that way. We want to have thousands of dollars in equipment and big lighting and all of these things. And we're missing the total point, which is just begin to have the conversation and then you can grow from there. So if we will literally have to rethink how we've been taught to be able to actually harness what's already available for us. I don't think that I always tell people, I said, you need to break the internet of your country. I mean, if enough of you are using it and using it to the max, then a Digicel or a Flow can look and say, hey, Montserrat or Antigua or St. Lucia, they're literally pumping and pushing our capacity to the limit. What do we need to do to expand it? And there are a lot of people who keep saying, we need more and more and more. It's not fast enough. It's not cheap enough or whatever. And what's going to drive that demand is more of us actually using it and just taking it to its peak every single time. And that is then going to be the impetus for some level of conversation of what do we need to do to expand it. But we've got to get away from this idea that we need to be perfect about it and just start. Someone shared a link with me the other day about this company in London that all they do is teach you how to cook. And literally, we have so many amazing cooks across the region. And the fact that all of our cuisine is different. You could actually have a full YouTube channel just making Jamaican food or specializing in Antiguan dishes or vegan dishes, using Caribbean products and stuff like that. Look at Caribbean Pot, the Trinidadian who lives in Canada. Again, what you will see is that there are a lot of Caribbean people creating content, but they're often in the diaspora.
Yes.
And what they have done is they have established and using their Caribbean identity to set them apart in the marketplace because there are a lot of people. And so suddenly you're not just any chef, you're a Caribbean chef or you're a Jamaican chef or you're a Trini chef. And that begins to form an identity. So until we begin to value where we're from and begin to appreciate it and realize how important it is, those are the things I think that are stopping us from actually pushing more of ourselves out there. Because we want to be perfect or we just don't see the value in our lives the way it is. For some reason, we don't seem to appreciate that until we leave the Caribbean.
That is so true. Okay, I think we probably need to start wrapping up this topic. So, Alvin, any final thoughts before we move on to yours?
And Nerissa articulated it so eloquently. It's that as persons in the Caribbean or people from the region, we need to have a voice in what's going on the internet. We need to push our content as well as appreciate what we produce. And I endorse fully what she said.
Absolutely. Yeah, because Nerissa, it really struck home when you said that we don't necessarily think who we are and what we can do is special. And I think, as you also said, that those who are in the diaspora now, who reside outside the region, draw on their Caribbean identity to make them unique. And we somehow, here in the region, I guess, we're looking outward all the time and not necessarily recognizing that we also have something to contribute.
Absolutely, Michelle. There are actors and people who've never, they weren't even born in the Caribbean. Their great grandfather's auntie was Jamaican, and they're suddenly telling you they're Jamaican because they
Yes, yes.
recognize they have to have
That's
something
true.
that sets them apart from the other actor in the room. You
Mm-hmm.
know, so if we don't see the value in that, we are missing it, and we're missing the opportunity. And I will tell you, there's a really big economic power in our diaspora who would pay to see what we produce if we would just produce it. But we're not doing that. So we're not able to see, that money coming in. And we're going to keep missing out because those diasporans are going to continue to exploit their identity. And we're not going to be able to benefit from that beyond consuming it.
Definitely. Okay, so thanks for that. Let's just move on now. So our second and final topic, regulatory challenges that the Internet of Things poses. So whether we realize it or not, big data, the increased use and reliance on smart devices along with machine-to-machine communication, for example, are ultimately leading to the realization of the Internet of Things in our society. So Alvin, you seem to be a bit concerned that as much as the Internet of Things is beginning to get a foothold in the Caribbean, we really had not begun to grapple with the regulatory implications.
That's correct.
Oh, great. So over to you and
Yes.
at least give your early thoughts.
Yes. Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, this is a topic which is close to my heart for a number of reasons, because we use the internet for various reasons, for communication, for accessing content, and so forth. But there's a pervasive side to the internet in that we're having all these smart devices. They record, they measure, they do all sorts of things. And we wonder what happens to all that information. Just to put it simply, when we talk about the Internet of Things, we're talking about smart devices that use wireless network to connect each other via machine-to-machine communication through the internet. And they do not require any human interactions whatsoever. Okay? Now, a few examples we could look at are things like smart appliances, like AC units that are able to sense whether or not there are persons in the room so they can switch on or off. Smart automobiles, which are able to drive and park themselves with minimal human input. We also have smart apps on phones or devices which control household appliances, your lights, your closed circuit camera TV systems, security alarms, and we also have wearable device. So it's a plethora of devices with sensors built in that have the ability to communicate wirelessly. Now, in terms of the regulatory challenges that are faced, these devices are coming into our markets, into our islands, into our lives, and we do not fully understand what are those implications. For one, there are privacy and security implications with these devices, because you would appreciate if you have a smart TV with a camera and mic that has a wireless connection, that it can be hacked, and that poses a security concerns. You also have, for example, baby monitoring devices which can be hacked, and all of these lead to security concerns. The other issue we have when it comes to looking at the regulatory challenges for the Internet of Things are devices which they come embedded with SIM cards, which the numbers are based in the country of manufacture. So, for example, you might have a fridge that has an embedded SIM card that comes from China, and that is fully roaming. In other words, that device, that embedded device, is communicating over a network, but at the same time, it's incurring roaming charges. So there are challenges we face in firstly understanding the technology and its application and how we can regulate or adjust our regulations to these devices.
Okay, that's quite sobering to when you talked about the SIM cards and roaming.
Yes, it is. Because I can give you an example. We were contacted, when I say we, the regulators were contacted in the Caribbean a few months ago, and it was a device manufacturer. They actually built the modules that would go into the smart fridges and smart cars, and they wanted to know what were the regulations for roaming. But we thought it was a standard, a cell phone user wants to know what are regulations when it comes to roaming. But when we looked at the depth of the questions, they were asking, what if a device came in, would that be roaming charge, and what were the regulatory oversight and questions of that nature. And it led us to think, what is coming down the pipe? Because there you would buy, let's say, for example, you buy a smart fridge. You think that your fridge is just plug it into the outlet, the electricity outlet, and that's it. But, this thing comes with more technology in it than probably a phone of 10 years or 5 years ago. These things come with sensors, they come with wireless connectors, they come with SIM cards, and they are on 24 hours, 7 days a week. And it's an area of concern. There are some countries have taken steps in terms of regulating these modules. They mandate that certain measures be placed, whether it's an off switch or that they inform the consumer or the user that these devices have these smart objects embedded in them. So it's an area of concern for us.
It is such a fascinating and quickly changing area. A few months ago, there was an article about how these devices were actually being used to in domestic violence situations.
Really?
Where
Yes,
spouses were they might have
Monitoring.
left the property, but they were still able to access the cameras, the light. They
That's
were literally
correct.
tormenting the women in terms of
Yes.
they still had access to be able to turn off the lights, change the temperature in the house, turn on the music. And so suddenly the men were gone, but they were still being abused and being trapped in their own homes because of these devices. So one of the things that they were talking about was the fact that you need to know how those devices work. You need to be the one to set it up, or at least know how to set up or change the password when you get these things. And like, Alvin said, to be able to deactivate them. Is there an off switch that you have the power to control versus somebody else who has it on their phone? The other day, we got a wireless extender in the house, and my son put the app on his phone, and if it was getting too many people on it, he would literally just bump off his siblings, and he didn't have to ask their permission to do it, and they were like, hey, wait a minute, how come I'm not getting any access? Because he wanted more things.
Mm-hmm.
So suddenly you realize, wait a minute, I pay the bills, but suddenly he can control who gets Wi-Fi.
Exactly.
And it's that sort of thing. So we have to actually be very aware, and our governments have to move more swiftly to stay ahead. Montserrat, the last 2 weeks, there was a consultant here helping us to update our IT laws to begin to look at things like, those sorts of privacy issues, who controls the data. I mean, what he just said about a roaming SIM card in your fridge, I'm thinking, okay, that's so if my fridge isn't coming on, you can stay in China and reboot my refrigerator, right?
Yeah,
But this is it.
What else is it good for?
Well, I mean, even with a lot of the, sorry, Alvin, I was just going to say,
Yeah, go ahead, Michelle. It's all right.
even with a lot of the vehicles now, especially the higher end ones, if you bring them in to be serviced, they're not necessarily being serviced, completely serviced locally. They're being patched into the manufacturers overseas who are doing a lot of the updating and so on. And probably maybe it would be like the actual physical changing of parts that is happening locally. So even,
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think
because most of them would need firmware updates and so forth, and that's been done remotely. In fact, right now, some of these vehicles you don't even need to bring them in to the dealers for those updates.
yeah, and certainly even for the diagnostics and
No,
so on to be
that's
run.
correct. Yeah.
So Nerissa mentioned about Montserrat having a consultant in to probably begin the effort to update their IT laws. I know that in the Ectel region, and I mean for quite a while now, there have been plans to update the telecoms legislation. Well, what's the status of that? And at least being part of that process, Alvin, to what extent probably do you think it's going to help to address some of these issues, whether or not not necessarily directly, but create the environment where those challenges that you see coming down the pipe with Internet of Things can probably be better addressed?
Well, with regards to the update of the Telecommunications Act, we have a draft electronic communications bill which has gone through a rigorous public consultation process, and it has been approved by the Ectel Council of Ministers. It's with the individual attorney general's chambers in each member state for final review before onward transmissions to the different parliaments. We should be at a stage where the new legislation would be enacted very soon. And it does have some provision in it with regards to the internet and service. So it speaks more to net neutrality and how data is treated. There are some provisions in there for that. And there's other provisions in there for privacy. And I don't think anything that deals specifically with security, but I know there are some issues with privacy concerns and consumer rights in that bill. But as per the Internet of Things, it's a very disruptive technology, and it has a role in almost every aspect of our lives, from health, education, you name it. It's there because it's the low manufacturing costs of sensors. So most appliances have embedded modules, vehicles, you name it. It's a wide range of manufactured appliances and so forth that comes with these embedded chips. And it raises a concern of what's going on with all that data, who has it, and for what purpose is all this data being recorded and transmitted.
Okay, and that is so true, Alvin. One of the things, though, that comes to mind, at least as for you as a part of the regulatory machinery, I'm concerned about, for example, with all of these appliances, gone away the days, probably not, or currently, where, for example, a lot of the regulatory focus in respect of type approval and the importation of telecommunications equipment would be primarily on wireless devices. But now with more devices coming in with sensors, you're going to find that it's almost as if the workload is going to explode as it relates to type approval and approving certain devices that can be imported, or certain appliances that can be imported into the various countries, and spectrum use.
That is so true. That is so true, Michelle. You hit the nail right on the head. If we were talking about 5 years or 10 years ago, you'd probably get one or two devices, whether it be a printer or a laptop with a wireless device. If you roll forward to this current time, almost every appliance or device has some wireless connectivity or a sensor embedded in it. So we're looking at an explosion. In fact, figures they have quoted here are stating by 2025 that Internet of Things application will generate $11.1 trillion per year. And that's an estimate taken from McKinsey Global Institute. So this is beyond just devices. There are also the software side of it, in which there are applications for capturing the data and making use of the data. It's becoming an industry of its own. Mm-hmm. And part of it is that they are grappling with standards, because these devices are using protocols or languages in which they communicate, and they haven't standardized that language as yet. So there are real challenges out there, and we're talking about the Caribbean with its own challenges. You know, we don't have the resources in terms of the manpower and the knowledge to really understand and fully comprehend the implications of all these technology and what is happening to the data, because that's the other aspect of it. When you have sensors on 24 hours, 7 days a week recording, where does that data go? And who is in charge of all that data?
Definitely. Nerissa?
I am just, I'm getting an education here in how far we've come. Wow. I just really and truly, we do have to get ahead of this. And again, we talked earlier about consuming. And because we've been so focused on that side, and we love having the availability and be able to show off that we can get smart cars and smartphones and smart TVs and refrigerators, but we're actually not thinking about how it's changing our landscape and how it will affect everything else. So I'm really happy we're having this conversation. And so, Alvin, I'm hoping I can go online, and maybe even at another point we can actually have a conversation and turn this into some content.
Yeah, we can do that, and it's something. Yeah, it's something we need to understand from both a personal standpoint and as a region, the implications of all these devices and what they play in our lives. Because gone were the days where, for example, an incident would happen, whether it's in your neighborhood or somewhere else on the street. These devices are live recording all the time. Your car can tell a police officer if you were driving too fast, and then you braked at the last minute.
Oh my gosh.
Other days, and that's what we're coming to.
Right, they're being used in criminal cases. There was a guy that got convicted the other day of killing his daughter, a stepdaughter, because it showed that her Fitbit stopped working at the same time his car was in the neighborhood, or outside the yard. So they figured, it had to be him because there was no one else around. So we do have to discuss it and begin to. So now that talks to me about our legal laws and how we use that sort of our devices in criminal cases.
That's correct.
Yes, this is just so fascinating, Albert.
It is.
my head itself.
It's Michelle, you won't believe the levels at which this thing goes. I mean, it covers all aspects of our lives, and that's the point that has to be made. The younger children are more comfortable with this technology. They accept it, they make full use of it, but persons of our generation and older, they're a bit circumspect of this technology, because it records every aspect of your life, whether the lights are on at home, your current usage, how you drive, what you eat. It's hard to get away from it.
That is so true. All right, folks, I think we need to wrap up now. So, Nerissa, I'll just give you a minute or so just to give any final thoughts, whether on the topic that you tabled or the conversation in general, and then Alvin, and then I'll just sign off thereafter.
We definitely, this conversation has just shown me that we definitely need to be having more conversations. So maybe we're not comfortable with the words content creation, but I like to tell everyone we need to tell our stories. So whether it is that you're into the Internet of Things like Alvin, or you're just into cooking, legal stuff, parenting, going to the beach, fashion, it doesn't matter, but you have a story to tell, and that story has immense value to people who you're connected with, or just people across the world who are waiting to find other people of like minds. And I really would love to see that Caribbean people begin to articulate those things using the digital platforms. Clearly, we are going to have to pay attention to what we're doing with our devices and the information that it's collecting about us. The good thing I would say about the fact that those devices are collecting data is that we should be able to access that data, then use that information to improve how we tell our stories. So maybe we may not be able to stop other people from gathering data on us, but we can also be using that very same data to improve our lives, make more money, change our communities, whatever it is. And that's what we need to do.
Excellent. Alvin?
Yes, thank you, Michelle, and thank you for having both myself and Nerissa on this platform. I think it's a very useful platform in getting information out there. As it pertains to the Internet of Things, I wouldn't want to scare anybody from it. It's already here. We can't escape it. It's a very disruptive technology, and we'll find it in all parts of our life. What we need to do is that we need to understand it. We need to make ourselves the master of that technology rather than the slave to it. Yeah. And understand it has benefits as well as risks. If we appreciate the benefits, we can mitigate the risk it poses to our lives. And just to say that as persons or policymakers and working in the regulatory field, we need to ensure that the technology is applied in the right way and used in the right way.
Thanks, Alvin. And thank you to both you and Nerissa for coming on. I just think that it's interesting how sometimes the topics are chosen independently, but somehow there are connections between the two of them. And I guess with respect to content creation, I really think that there probably needs to be a greater effort by countries and probably led by government or more greatly supported by government in terms of digitizing the content, because so much is going to be lost in the coming years in terms of documents, recordings, etc. that we currently have. And it would just be a travesty to lose those things, especially when essentially this is what really is a great part of our value of being from the Caribbean, so from the individual countries and from the region as a whole. I think with respect to Internet of Things, we certainly haven't begun to wrap our heads around it. I'm even concerned from a regulatory perspective that we don't fully appreciate the amount of resources it's going to take to probably, at least in the early stages, to begin to oversee the various elements that are going to be taxed as the devices become more embedded in our society. So from even matters related to spectrum management, and you, Alvin, would know about that far more than I would, and in terms of the licensed and unlicensed spectrum, and the various limitations of the bands, especially in the Eastern Caribbean. Matters related to numbering and how our local number resources are going to be used, etc. So I think I'm especially concerned about whether or not the regulatory mechanisms that currently exist within the region, whether or not sufficient attention is being given to the Internet of Things and the various components that will have some sort of impact or draw on some of our national resources, so with respect to numbering, spectrum, yes, etc.
Yes, it will have its impact, definitely, because you're looking at more devices coming online, and it will have a significant impact, especially as we switch from IPv4 to IPv6. So,
all right, folks, I think that's it for today. Thank you so much again for joining me on this community chat.
It's been our pleasure, Michelle.
Absolutely, Michelle. Thank you for having us.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the ICT Pulse podcast. You can find links to some of the things we talked about on our website, ict-pulse.com. If you like this episode, please show your support by leaving us a review on iTunes, as it will help others find the show. You can email us at info@ict-pulse.com or drop us a note on our Facebook page, facebook.com/ICTPulse, or via Twitter @ICTPulse. We hope you'll join us again for our next episode. Take care.